Hi there, I'm Betsy Rosenberg and very excited. Am I ever not excited? No, I always start every interview with that because it's true. The people that I interview are in the forefront of making change, and not just any change, climate change and all kinds of environmental improvements that we so desperately need. So I'm very excited and thrilled and honored to have with me now Bianca Pitt. She is the co-founder of a group that just the name caught my attention, and I'm very eager to hear more. She Changes Climate, and the SHE is in capital letters. So I've seen you on LinkedIn, Bianca, and I always try to read your links, and it calls to me, it speaks to me as a woman trying to change the climate for some years now. And I saw that you were involved with COP. You are from the United Kingdom. So I just thought you'd be a perfect person as, we're coming out of the Glasgow conference before the dust settles and before it's a fading memory. What happened, what didn't happen, what needs to happen next. But would like to start with your background. If you could just share a little bit about how you came to be in this wonderful group.
Well, thank you very much, Betsy, for reaching out to us and giving us the opportunity and me the opportunity to explain more about the work of She Changes Climate. My background is really, quite a varied one. I started off in as a lawyer and then worked in industry, media and corporate finance, and took time off to have my first child. And that for me was a defining moment. I had time to read up outside my industry interest. And the more I read, the more questions I asked, the more I learned about the world as it presented itself to me in 2009, the more horrified I was, particularly realizing that I'd just given birth to a baby whose future was, clearly jeopardized by the building ecological crisis that I saw was lying ahead of us. And I set up a network at the time to reach out to women working in the environmental sector. I had joined various boards, various charities, Client Earth and the Environmental Funders Network and so on, over here in the UK. And it gave me the opportunity to really look at what was going on worldwide, who was doing what, how sort of dramatic were things really, what did the environmental crisis actually consist of. Essentially, I usually speak about climate, biodiversity and pollution and waste as sort of three heads of the Medusa, if you want, three sides of our environmental crisis. And what I certainly thought was missing was collaboration in the environmental charity sector and across the globe. We needed to work together, very much like the fossil fuel industry has very successfully lobbied governments around the world. Clearly, the environmental sector had to do the same, and people had to talk to each other. So I set up this network to connect women with each other. Why? I was invited as a TEDx speaker to talk about my experience, and I wanted to speak about how, as a mother, I'd become motivated to become an environmental activist. And looking at women speak and present at conferences, I noticed that there weren't that many in the room as I sort of expected to find, and thought, well, it would be great to connect the ones I know, environmental philanthropists, CEOs and founders of charities and foundations and influencers, and created this network called Women of the Environment. And it gave me, we're now about 80 women around the world, covering everything from climate, biodiversity to pollution and waste and all ecosystems. And it gave me really, I would say, unique insight into how women think and feel about what's going on, their hopes for the future, their frustrations, their concerns. And I would say, indeed, I can't imagine a sort of men's network sharing the same sentiment in such open words with such passion and emotion. But that in itself wasn't enough for us to set up She Changes Climate. I wanted to keep it informal at the time and not create too many overheads, until the UK government, which is hosting this year's climate conference, the so-called COP, this time COP26, announced their leadership team, and that team was an all-male lineup. And now we're in 2020 at that point, very much, I live in the Western world. I'm used to being heard and listened to. As a woman, I honestly have to say I've not ever felt discriminated, I don't think. So it was quite startling to us to be presented with a team that clearly, exuded women. No one seemed to have thought that peculiar. No one had noticed that something was missing. And so we decided to set up a group. Why? Because, whilst I personally had honestly given up on COP and as a format, I thought, well, if we're at COP26, something's not working. But my colleagues persuaded me that, this was far too important, and they were right. Obviously this is far too important to just let that go. The decisions coming out of this COP would affect not only all our work, but also all future generations to come. So we had to make sure that this conference was handled in the best possible way. And we decided to set up this campaign and at the same time run a diplomatic effort behind the scenes to negotiate with the leadership team to see whether they would just amend their team, and we could all go back to our work as we normally would. I see you have a question.
So you have so many. First of all, when you talked about all men, I flashed back to a conference I attended in Los Angeles, was hosted by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who did not start out as a climate activist. He was driving famously a big giant Hummer made by GM, which belongs nowhere, maybe on the battlefield, but that's about all. And he had a bit of a wake-up call. And I like to think maybe our little group, a group of moms in 2002, after we went into Iraq, started a campaign called Don't Be Fueled, Mothers for Clean and Safe Vehicles, because clearly we were going in there, at least in part because of the oil, although that was not abundantly clear to the public, it seemed. And I'm driving around my hometown in Marin County, California, just north of San Francisco, and these moms with a tiny baby are driving around in these giant GMC SUVs, and it didn't seem very clean or safe. And we tried to educate soccer moms, if you will, about the need for fuel efficient, family friendly cars. And so my daughter and I, she was 5 at the time, went to the Capitol steps with our Don't Be Fueled moms, and we campaigned. And I got a meeting with not Schwarzenegger, but his top aide. And I said, he's coming out talking about hydrogen Hummers now because he was starting to see the light, the green light. But I said, it doesn't feel congruent, if he's promoting green cars, but driving, even if it's hydrogen. And so I just told him that the moms were watching and that he needed to be more consistent and get Maria Shriver, his wife at the time, a Prius, what I was driving. Anyway, I was at this conference, and in the room, climate conference, there were probably, I have a picture somewhere, 12 to 15 seats on stage, and it was all men in suits, literally, probably all white men. I can't say for sure, but it was so monochrome, the whole thing. And I was like the only one having apoplectic fits. I was just saying. And that was probably 2008, maybe. And no one else seemed to notice. So I totally get what you're saying. And the fact that it's 2021 and it hasn't changed remarkably is remarkable in and of itself. So is this the first COP that you attended?
Yeah, that was the first COP I attended. I didn't intend to go there. I thought we'd just fix it, and that's it. And then we're done. We spoke to the CEO of COP, Peter Hill, and said, listen, Peter, imagine the team would have been announced as an all-female team. Would that not have seemed to you a bit strange? Or imagine we would say, you have to have 20% men and 80% women. Wouldn't that sound a bit odd as well? But discussing this with him, we noticed that when he said, yes, we know we need to get women, indigenous peoples, and youth and Barme heard as well. That I thought he just doesn't understand that women make up half of the world's population.
We're not a special interest group, other than we are the nurturers. Exactly. We are the ones who bear children. Should be a very special interest group.
Exactly. So to me, it was quite an interesting moment, because I would say we opened a can of worms. You talk about that as something that sort of could be a sort of bottomless pit. You hope not, but what it certainly was a blind spot. And interestingly, the UNFCCC, that is the governing body for the climate negotiations, had actually created a policy, the so-called Gender Action Plan, to ensure that women are indeed equally represented at all levels of climate negotiations. And the UK was a signatory to it, signed that in Madrid at COP25. But then, 2 years later, when they are the host country, decide to ignore that. And it reminded me of generally environmental law. We have fairly good environmental laws around the world. And yet, unless we actually enforce them, we're going nowhere. And the same is true for climate negotiations. Here we are at COP26. Scientists have officially declared us, being in a climate emergency now, and emissions are still rising. Well, surely now, something should ring a bell. We are clearly not going forward. We're not making the progress that we need to make. And hence, we need to look at the leadership structures, for international climate negotiations, for these conferences. But not only that, we need to look at government leadership structures and business leadership structures. And wherever we looked, Betsy, women were missing. It was just astonishing. I mean, as well as I do, in the US, 0% of US presidents have been women. 3.5% of the US Supreme Court. Yeah, 3.5% of the US Supreme Court only is women. In the UK, the picture's not better. 3.5% of prime ministers have been women. If you look at parliamentarians worldwide, a quarter of them only are women, and a fifth of the world's ministers. And then looking at businesses in the UK, the FTSE 100, 7% of the CEOs only are women. Board members worldwide, only 17% are women. Looking at these numbers, it's just gutting, quite frankly. Here we are, half the world's population, incredibly caring, intuitive, bright, educated people who aren't actually working in leadership on trying to get us out of this crisis. Well, that has to change now. We can't, we always talk about getting 50-50 vision. We can't expect the architects of the old system to tear down all these industries that we now need to reform, the finance industry, the energy industry, the transport industry.
Everything.
Well,
we need to change our system, our transportation, our food systems. Everything needs to change globally. And you can't fix a problem if the same characters who set it up, maybe not intentionally, are still in power. And it's not just, and it's media too, even though there's many more females in broadcasting, which I, watch a lot on television news and radio. It's much better than it was when I started out in broadcasting news, but it's still more preponderance white men. And so it's really a shame that it's taken this long. And yet most of the men I know would love for women to take over. They see what has been wrought by, male dominance, patriarchal societies. So it's almost like by default, we just keep doing the same thing. And it's the same outrage I'm sure you felt when I was able to go to Glasgow. I was hoping to, but heard that the indigenous people were not really heard, and the youth activists, they were given lip service in the speeches, but they weren't really included in the blue zones. Did you experience that as well? So it was women and other minorities, even though females are not a minority.
No, we always talk about, getting in women in all that diversity. And our campaign is a truly international campaign. We've got signatories, over 500 female climate leaders from around the world signed our campaign, and our steering committee, we made sure that we had people from all over the world represented there. And, and looking at COP, it was quite interesting to see that indeed youth leaders, indigenous people were invited to speak. But the feedback we got from them is that it all felt rather tokenistic. They never felt really at home or welcome in the blue zone. They were rolled in to speak, and then
was there anyone in the audience while they were speaking? Because that's a problem too. They could say, okay, you have the stage, nobody happens to be in here at the moment.
I do think that there was an audience. You could see in the televised broadcast of it that the leaders were sitting there, and indigenous people were speaking to them. Youth leaders from around the world were speaking to them. but for me, the most striking difference there was the difference between the emotional presentation from youth leaders, from indigenous people about their situation in usually the global south, talking about people dying, starving as we speak because of years of drought, for example. And then the seemingly unemotional response of our Western government leaders, which was really strange to watch. You had men sitting in the audience. It was predominantly men. Only 10 out of 140 world leaders that attended COP were women again, so 130 were actually men. They just seem to be oddly unaffected by these descriptions of what is actually going on the ground around the world. Here are people talking about the catastrophe they are facing, that their people are facing. We're talking millions. 220 million people are forecast to lose their homes because of rising sea levels, for instance, and we see the beginning of this now everywhere. And yet our Western leaders sit there, sometimes with their eyes closed, just utterly unmoved. And I think that is something. I spoke on a panel today about leadership, female leadership, and I think we need to talk about emotion here, right? If we aren't able to connect to our own emotions, I don't think we should be leaders. It's time to step aside. If we don't think or don't feel able to address and respond to this crisis that is clearly going on everywhere around the world, including our own countries, then we shouldn't be there in the driving seat. These are the wrong people in the driving seat now. We need people who are able to also emotionally feel what is going on, who are emotionally able to connect, to take us forward.
If you're not emotional about humanity hanging in the balance, what the heck are you going to get roused up about? It would be a comedy. It would be absurd if it wasn't so tragic and serious. I want to ask you about your leader, Boris Johnson, because he was talking a good talk. What's your sense of him? He seemed to be more enlightened than most, but then I read a lot of things about how, not just with the United Kingdom, but a lot of the countries are saying they're doing one thing, but their emissions are telling another story. How would you characterize the UK and Great Britain leadership?
Well, it's exactly as you say. There's a lot of talk and not a lot of walking the talk, and it's wholly unsatisfactory. I mean, this is not the leadership we are seeing here is not responding to a climate emergency. This is not how you behave in an emergency. If you are in an emergency, first and foremost, you have to focus, and you're the leader of the government. You have to focus all your departments on this emergency. What do we all have to do? And I have to say, Biden, interestingly, seemed to do that. Certainly watching from afar. When he took over the administration, the climate experts from around the US were invited to join the administration and to advise the administration. And this is something we've certainly been missing here in the UK. So if you look at our government, and actually the COP team itself, and that was rather striking, because climate is of course such a technical subject. You can't just sort of run a climate conference, from one day to another,
right?
Expecting to understand all detail. I've spent 10 years looking at nothing but climate, biodiversity, and pollution and waste, and I'm still learning every day, right? So
some of the newsrooms, by the way, at the television news networks, they've literally gone into the newsroom and said, okay, who wants to be our climate correspondent? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And then whoever raised their hand got called on. We're told to go call some climate scientists and come up to speed. Well, for someone like myself, who's been in the climate and green soup for 2 decades or more, it's really insulting. They wouldn't do that for a tech reporter or financial correspondent. Even the sports guys got training. What about our ecosystem out of balance is not complicated. There's nothing simple or surface about environmental challenges. So yeah,
that's right. I think we need to understand that what is the ecology, what are our ecosystems? It is the largest infrastructure that we possess. It's this gigantic infrastructure that is serving all of us ultimately, right? Providing us with clean water, clean air, soil to grow our food on, etc. Now,
a climate we can count on, or have been able to for centuries and centuries.
Exactly.
And it's unraveling before our eyes.
It is collapsing. Exactly. So what you need is someone who understands the infrastructure, what it consists of, what happens if it fails. This is a major, major issue we're talking about. This is not just fixing, I don't know, the education system, that in itself would be a major undertaking. But here we're talking about something which is really indeed very technical. You need to have good sort of engineering understanding of it. And also, and that's something I had to learn, and it took me a rather long time, is to understand the intersectionality of everything around it. Yeah. So when people came to me talking about climate justice, I thought, and intersectionality, I thought, listen, we can't fix everything. We've got enough on our hands just sorting out the environmental crisis we've got. Please, let's not try and sort out all the social issues we've got as well. And it took me literally till last year to understand that actually one is the root cause of the other. So it's actually indeed, our social issues. And here I'm really specifically referring to this exclusion of women from leadership. That is, in my view and in our view, causing the climate crisis. If we consistently exclude half of the world's population in decision making, and only let a small group of people take all really important decisions, and we all know that, basically we in the West here are responsible for how things have been run up until now.
And most of the emissions, the preponderance of the greenhouse gas emissions certainly come from the West and developed nations.
Of course, absolutely.
And that was another failure, that there was not a commitment to the global South and those in the developing countries and islands that are sinking as we speak, getting, real commitments for recompense.
That's right. That's right. And I think I think this is a moment of reckoning. I think we all have to be jolly honest. There's no point beating around the bush or being cute about this. We're in a climate emergency. Emissions are rising. Whatever we've been trying to do till now doesn't work. We don't have the luxury to wait till COP40 or 50 or 60. The scientists say we've got less than a decade to sort this out. Otherwise, we find ourselves in a state of permanent climate chaos. So, let's just do something about this. We have to accelerate climate action. We all know that, and what easier than bringing women into leadership to help with this effort? Once you understand that SDG 5 talks about, climate action, that actually bringing in women is climate action, is a measure to take if you want to accelerate change for the better, then I think, the doors are wide open. It's not that difficult, if you ask me. It's also more fun if you have men and women exactly leading together, right? It takes a bit of the weight of the men's shoulders. They don't have to try and sort everything out themselves.
Take a break. For 10 years, they can take a nap and,
exactly.
Take up tennis, take up art, whatever. Give us a chance. But what is it about, Code Red for Humanity that doesn't just scream, drop everything? We need all hands on deck. And yet, I don't know about in your country, but it's still parallel universes. I watch the Today Show, the chipper morning shows, and they do a little bit of news and a lot of features and a lot of recipes and makeovers and sales and steals and deals. And it's just like, you'd think that, it's all about Christmas and holidays. And it's like, It's difficult knowing what we know, right? And we've been trying to spread the word and trying to raise the volume. And the scientists are now less timid and are coming out there and screaming from the rooftops, and it still doesn't seem to be enough. So where, Bianca, do you think we should go from here? We, in the Western world, we as women who are concerned about climate, to get more people concerned about climate, because I just don't see how we're going to have this epic, I say I'm a woman on emission, to try to get people to see that, how are we going to cut our emissions in half, get off our gases in less than a decade, if, half the population is voting for someone like Trump, who doesn't believe in science. And I live in Texas, where the Senator Cruz and Governor Abbott, they're clueless. And like, even without all those obstacles and the fossil fuel industry and the Coke industry here, we still have such an epic challenge that it's so daunting that we may not do it. We could well fail, whatever that looks like, God forbid. But with all these, ridiculous obstacles and people and, institutions in the way, it just makes it that much harder, and it makes us less likely to succeed. Does that not keep you up at night? It does me. And there's still, by the way, on Fox, these right-wing media outlets in my country denying climate reality and mocking the activists. I've been on Sean Hannity's show 15, 16 times, telling him he's on the wrong side of history and he's a dinosaur, and they think it's funny. Ha, ha, ha.
I think you need to stay calm. And I think, talk about your feelings. I think it's just fair to talk about how we feel. I mean, certainly young people are very worried. We've been, why are we all just digging into trivia, to try and distract ourselves even further? I mean, in a way, we've been sort of bought out of things, right? We are so comfortable. We have so much convenience around us. We don't want to face up to the realities of the planet. But increasingly we all know the direction of travel is just going to get ugly. It is going to get ugly. And I think we need people there to speak the truth. And I think we need people, and I think women in a way are uniquely positioned to do that, because I think the world around us has been designed by men for men. So it's not easy for women. The workplace isn't easy, and so on. And we've had to arrange ourselves, but also try and fit in. So, one important measure to take is really we have to speak truth to power. There's unfortunately no other way around it. And I'm not someone who naturally seeks to speak, publicly or seeks the limelight at all. I very much enjoy my life at home as a housewife, quite frankly. But now is not the time to stay silent. Now is the time to really speak up. And I'm concerned about the future of my children. I've got 2 young children. I haven't brought them into the world to then think that they might not live beyond the age of 40. I'm here to sort things out for them. I'm the adult. Yeah, I'm jolly well going to do something about this. I like a bit of a challenge as well. So hey, it's good to do something that's meaningful, and of our time, right? What's the point of just sitting around at home,
Well, the reality is whatever we care about, nothing is going to be very good on a bad planet, nothing.
Exactly.
Not our economy, not our culture, not the things people care about, shopping, sports, you name it. And yes, we do have to have a conversation about capitalism, unchecked growth, because we are wasting resources that our kids and grandkids are going to need, whether it's water or precious minerals or lumber or you name it. We're just we're wasteful in this country, and that's what got me into this. That was my gateway drug. Was I didn't like all the trash that was mindlessly piling up in landfills till I found out the global warming, that's what we called it back then in the early 2000s, was much more serious than garbage going into landfills. So it's mindless waste that really bothers me so much, and that we're wasting precious time, and that the youth advocates, activists are, shouting for adults to do our job, right? They're saying, please do everything you can. Don't wait for us to solve it. Like, that's the wrong takeaway message. And one last question to go on with you, and I'd love to have you back because I love what you're doing, and see how Green TV might be able to help spread the word, because we're all about solutions, and you were certainly an admirable solutionary, as we say. The issue of COVID, not like, to me, it feels like a pandemic is a terrible thing to waste. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And the environmental underpinnings, the hidden drivers of humans, destroying habitats and wildlife invasion and putting different species closer together and each other in terms of wildlife, but also humans in closer contact. And that is a breeding ground for more viruses. You'd think that would get people's attention, but it seems like those dots were not connected enough, certainly in American media. And that's really a shame that we're now getting back to flying and driving and shopping and all that. And we didn't really get the big takeaway that it's a tiny interconnected world, that nature, we need nature more than she needs us, and that things can go south really quickly. And if we ignore warnings like there were about pandemics, the worst will happen. And that's the sad, tragic irony, isn't it? That it will only be gloom and doom and bleak and awful if we continue with business as usual.
I think we've got to make it also exciting. You know, I think it is really attractive and exciting to do something and to shape the world, to be a change maker. I find that personally extremely exciting. You know, I'd much rather do that than sort of just sit and not do something about things. And I think often the sort of environmental movement was associated with hippies and the 60s and sort of slightly naive ideas about the economy and so on. But
tree huggers,
yeah, exactly.
It's like, what about, and when the newscasters would say environmentalists lost around today, I'd say, well, I think that means all of us. Only those who eat, breathe, or drink, you know, like they were put in a special category, like just for the environmentalists. Those climate change activists will appease them. You know, it's so silly.
Exactly. No, we need to show, you know, that actually it's fun to it's really fun to regenerate the world. We want to use words, you know, like regenerate, because what we really want to focus on is regenerating the planet now. And I mean, what could be more exciting? What a positive word, right? To regenerate something. Yeah, that's exciting. It's attractive. Yeah. And I think you know, as I'm certainly absolutely loving this work. I don't want to do anything else. You know, it's not always easy. It's actually really a heck of a lot of fun. I meet a huge amount of great people. You know, it's exciting to be changing the planet. It's exciting to prepare a better, sustainable future for our children. And hey, yeah, it's great. Yeah. So I think that is something, you know, this is not about doom and gloom, quite the opposite. Yeah. This is about, you know, celebration of life and the web of life. It's about celebration of beauty. You know, nature is incredibly beautiful. Absolutely.
So
the greatest treasure.
It's so healing, especially as things get more stressful and crazy and chaotic. I mean, science has shown that your mind on water is happier, you know, we need nature. And, you know, I'm sure maybe it was different for you growing up, but we grew up playing outdoors till after dark. And I grew up in a walnut orchard that's now Silicon Valley. It was fruit and nut trees back then. And my daughter only got that at camp, you know, because in one generation, we lost just the ability to go run around and play without your parents watching you. And the sad thing is the whole shifting baseline concept, which is the problem is that my daughter won't know what she's missing when she raises her kids, because she didn't get to run around till after dark, a whole generation, obviously. And, you know, there's so much being lost, and the memories getting lost too of what was. And that's so sad and so profound. So
it's a huge issue.
Yeah, and you say it's fun. It's funny because I would not have called this fun, especially having been way too early on the green beat. But what it has given me, and I think everyone I've met who is an environmental activist, advocate, whatever you want to call us, advocates for life on this planet, continuing, radical as that is it gives a sense of purpose, doesn't it? Because you don't have to wonder what the meaning of your life is. And on the one hand, it's exhausting because we'll never be finished, and too many people not wanted to listen, and we're up against these, you know, built-in structures of hierarchy, patriarchy, all that. But it also, every day I get up, you know, and then here's the last irony about environmentalists. We sort of have this reputation as being, you know, pessimists, you know, negative. No, actually, I don't think there's anyone more optimistic than the environmentalist that gets up every day saying, today's the day the world's going to wake up and smell the carbon, you know, and I've been doing that for more than 20 years. So I'm either crazy, or some people say, gee, Betsy, you're so committed. I say, yeah, I may end up committed someday.
It is. Also, I spoke to a colleague of mine the other day who, in a COP meeting, a CEO was presenting their strategy, saying that they just turned into this really green company and weren't they amazing. And she got up not even in the Q&A session, she just got up in the middle of the CEO presentation and said, well, I for one know that you're not telling the truth, because I know that you build incinerators. And what do you burn in these incinerators is plastic trash. So that is not green. What are you talking about? No, and she called him up and she said, I see you. I see you. I see you, and you're not telling the truth. Well, wow. It's difficult to do that, right? Very, very difficult. She wasn't, you know, that is not easy to do. But then afterwards, another colleague of mine was in the audience as well. And they afterwards went to a pub, and one filmed the other. One is a well-known supermodel, so she's good at presenting things. And she said, "Whoa, I have to, I'm filming my colleague here because she's a heroine. That is so cool." And that is what I mean with fun. Whilst it's not easy, I think it's great to be able to do that. It's great to stand up to this BS, I'm sorry, and say, this is just a lot of nonsense.
It's wrong, man. Like no clothes. Yeah, it's not
like
us.
Speaking to a 5-year-old. Yeah, it's like speaking to 5-year-olds, like saying, "I know you've stolen the chocolate. What are you saying? It's gone, and there's a wrapper. Don't try sort of fool me here." It's great. So that is something, that's what I mean with fun. It's exciting. We need to. I studied law, so I just love kind of getting to the core of it and really uncovering things for what they are. That is what I find really fun. Of course it's bitter because you sometimes think, my God, I mean, how can these humans be so, go so low and kind of just have no moral compass and all that, Yes, of course, if you sort of start worrying about that, that can be depressing, but actually I just think, they take the easy route, they don't want to, they still just want to get their salaries, they kind of, without imagination and creativity, they can't imagine a sustainable future. All these limitations are just typical human traits, and it's good for us to play, it's a game ultimately in which we have to say, we call this out, sorry, this is just a load of nonsense. And that's what I mean with fun. This is what people can actually really enjoy. It's instead of sitting at home playing computer games, come out and uncover environmental destruction, ecocide, which is going on all around the world all the time. Let's call it out for what it is. This is ecocide. We're not going to accept it any longer. Exactly. And I see you, that's important to say.
I mean, there's no more noble cause. Let's leave it there. And I just want to ask you in 30 seconds, what would you like people to do who are watching this?
Oh, well, it's a very good question. Come on board. I mean, we need everyone, everybody, no matter who you are, where you are. If you think, oh, I can't do anything, I'm sitting at home, who am I? No one's going to listen to me. I promise you, I was in the same situation once. I thought no one's going to listen to me. And look at me, here I am, interviewed by Betsy. There's a place for all of us in this. We all have to have a role in this. It's exciting, as I said. Reach out to others, form your own networks, because there are many, many people out there that care for this very deeply, and connect to this also on an emotional level and speak about your emotions. Don't be afraid of them.
I love that. Be part of community. We will welcome you. And I always say that when I speak, I say each one of you needs to be an ambassador. This isn't a job for environmentalists or recycling professionals. This is for all of us. So when you see them serving straws, whether you need one or want one or not, say something. And that's just the beginning. And where you see waste, speak up. As I say, we have this saying, if you see something, say something. With the terrorist threat at airports and things, if you see a unattended suitcase, say something. I say, if you see something, save something, whatever it is, and it adds up, and it spreads consciousness, and it makes it okay to speak up. I could give you all these examples of times I have spoken up, and they usually say thank you. They do it that way because they always have had the fireplace burning in a July heat wave in a motel. Don't get me started. Or when the air conditioning's blasting, on a airport shuttle bus, and it's 50 degrees out, and the guy driving is hot and maybe a little too heavy. So we're all freezing our, what's off. Okay. That is it. Cause my technician is going to have a lot not much to edit. I don't think we made too many things we want to change. I really appreciate the conversation, your wisdom and your leadership, Bianca Pitt, and She Changes Climate. We'll be looking for you on LinkedIn. We will post your links on Green TV, and please let people know about this platform. This is what we're here for, is to shed light on the information and inspiration to motivate all of us to do more. For one
Thank you, Betsy. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Great that you're doing this. Thank you.
Okay, talk to you soon. Okay, thank you so much.